Hidden beneath the earth and etched into stone are the true archives of ancient civilizations. We are exploring 23 forgotten storage systems that reveal more about our ancestors than any written record could ever tell you. By the end of this journey, you will see history not as a series of dates and names, but as a story told through the ingenious ways people preserved their food, their wealth, and their very way of life. Why would an empire choose to bury its greatest treasures forever? And how could a simple hole in the ground spark the rise of the first cities? What do you believe our own storage methods will reveal about us 1,000 years from now? The story of storage begins with a revolution that unfolded not in palaces but in the dirt. Deep within the earliest villages of the Fertile Crescent, people carved bell-shaped pits directly into the earth. They lined these cavities with plaster and woven basketry, creating the world's first grain silos. This was not merely a practical solution, it was a profound shift in human consciousness. For the first time, communities were actively planning for a future beyond the next season. The ability to store surplus wheat and barley transformed food from a daily pursuit into a form of capital. Archaeologists studying sites like Jerf El Omer noticed something crucial. The pits were not scattered randomly. Their size, their number, and their placement within the settlement paint a clear picture. Some households clearly controlled more surplus than others. This is where we see the first subtle cracks in a relatively equal social structure, the faint beginnings of social inequality rooted in who owned the harvest. The grain itself became a silent currency, enabling trade and supporting a population no longer constantly on the move. These humble holes in the ground tell us that civilization was not born from a sudden invention, but from the slow, deliberate act of saving for a rainy day. This foundational need to preserve a harvest would soon be tested in one of the most demanding environments on Earth. But in the land of the pharaohs, grain storage evolved from a household necessity into the very architecture of power. The Egyptian state granary was a fortress of food, a sprawling complex of mud brick chambers that formed the economic heart of the kingdom. To control the grain was to control the people, and the pharaohs mastered this with a bureaucracy of almost modern complexity. Imagine a scribe sitting in the shade of one of these vast structures, meticulously recording every sack of emmer wheat and barley on a papyrus scroll. The Rind mathematical papyrus, a famous administrative text, is filled with problems about distributing grain rations, revealing a state that could calculate and allocate food for thousands. This was not just bookkeeping, it was the mechanism that built the pyramids. A workforce of that immense scale could not be fed by chance. It required a system capable of predicting needs, storing colossal surpluses, and moving supplies with precision. The granaries themselves were marvels of practical design. Their floors were raised to protect the precious grain from dampness and pests, while clever ventilation systems kept the air dry and circulating. Separate compartments held different commodities, a testament to an advanced understanding of preservation. These structures were more than just functional, they were potent symbols of royal authority and divine favor. The pharaoh, as the provider for all, ensured the kingdom's stability against the unpredictable Nile. The sheer scale of these operations reveals a society capable of thinking in centuries, managing logistics on an almost unimaginable level to secure its eternity. From the sun-baked granaries of the Nile, our journey takes us across the sea to the island of Crete, where a different kind of royal storage tells a story not of a god-king, but of a labyrinthine palace economy. The ground floors of the Minoan palaces were not grand halls but long, cool corridors lined with colossal clay jars. These were the palace magazines, and the giant Pithoi vessels, some taller than a person, stood as silent sentinels of a complex economic machine. At Knossos and Phaistos, these storerooms formed the very foundation of the palace, both literally and figuratively. They were not hidden away but placed at the heart of the labyrinth, a public declaration that the ruler's power was built on a foundation of olive oil, wine, and grain. This was not the singular focus of the Egyptian granaries, but a diversified portfolio of wealth. The Pithoi held the staples of the Mediterranean diet, but also precious trade goods like fine textiles and decorated pottery, ready to be loaded onto ships. The true key to understanding this system lies not just in the jars, but in the small, fired clay tablets found alongside them. These are the Linear B records, and they are essentially ancient inventory lists. They give us the names of officials, the quantities of goods stored, and the distributions made. We know the titles of the people who managed this wealth, transforming anonymous storage into a recorded administration. The very architecture tells a story of control, with the magazines integrated directly into the palace's core, proving that political power in Minoan Crete was inseparable from control over resources. This centralized storage fueled their extensive maritime trade network, exchanging the contents of these Pithoi for copper, ivory, and other luxuries across the Mediterranean. Even the Pithoi themselves were more than mere containers. Many were beautifully decorated with raised ridges and intricate patterns, turning a practical storage vessel into a work of art. This reveals a culture where wealth and aesthetic expression were deeply intertwined. Storage was a public display of prosperity and influence, a testament to a society that had mastered its environment and its trade routes to create a life of abundance and beauty. The Minoan system, with its centralized control of diverse goods, stands in stark contrast to the one that developed in isolation, high in the Andes Mountains. High in the thin air of the Andes, the Inca built an empire not on a single granary, but on 1,000 tiny ones scattered like beads on a string along their royal roads. These were the qullqas, state-controlled storehouses that formed the lifeblood of the largest empire in the pre-Columbian Americas. Their design was a masterclass in adaptation. Built on high, cold slopes to harness the natural refrigeration of the altitude, their circular stone bases and thatched conical roofs were engineered for survival. Sophisticated ventilation channels cut through the stone floors kept the air moving, preserving everything from freeze-dried potatoes called chuño to dried meat, maize, fine textiles, and even weapons. This was not a single, massive archive, but a decentralized, responsive network. Imagine a runner, a chasqui, arriving at a tambo way station, breathless with a message. He would not find an empty larder. The nearby qullqa would supply his needs and the needs of any imperial army unit on the move without ever drawing resources from the local village. This was the system's true genius, as scholars like Terence Daltroy have explained. By creating this self-sufficient supply chain, the Inca state minimized its reliance on conquered peoples. It prevented local chiefs from hoarding resources and eliminated a primary cause of rebellion. The empire provided for its own from its own stores, thereby cementing control. The strategic placement of these warehouses reveals a mind capable of thinking in 4 dimensions, planning for movements through space and time across some of the most punishing terrain on Earth. This was a living, breathing logistics network, the cloud storage of its day, ensuring data, in the form of food and supplies, was always accessible where and when it was needed. It demonstrates an empire built not just on conquest, but on the meticulous, forward-thinking management of every resource it possessed. From mountains built to store solid goods, we descend to a landscape where the greatest treasure was liquid, and its storage shaped a civilization's very soul. In the heart of a sun-scorched desert, the greatest treasure was not gold, but cool, liquid water. The Persian Empire solved this existential challenge not with one invention, but with two, creating a symbiotic system that turned barren plains into lush gardens. The first was the Qanat, a breathtaking feat of underground engineering. Teams of workers dug a series of vertical shafts deep into the earth, connecting them with a gently sloping tunnel that could stretch for miles. This tunnel tapped into mountain aquifers far away, guiding the precious water by gravity alone to the surface, where it could nourish fields and quench the thirst of growing cities. This was not a project for a single lifetime, but a communal effort that required generations of knowledge and cooperation. The entire community depended on the Qanat, and its maintenance forged powerful social bonds, with clear rules for water sharing and collective responsibility for its upkeep. But the Persian genius did not stop with transporting water. They asked a seemingly impossible question: how could they preserve the cold of winter to survive the furnace of summer? The answer was the Yakhchal, a towering domed structure made from a special heat-resistant mortar called saruj. These clever buildings, often built near the Qanats, acted as massive refrigerators. During the winter, ice harvested from nearby mountains or even water frozen in shallow pools was brought inside. The Yakhchal's thick, insulating walls and its sophisticated wind-catcher ventilation system kept the interior frigid, preserving ice and food all through the blazing summer months. This combination of Qanat and Yakhchal reveals a civilization that did not merely endure its environment, but mastered it through patient, collective intelligence. It was a technology of creation, enabling not just survival, but the cultivation of paradise gardens in the desert. This drive to preserve an entire way of life would find its most elaborate expression not in the land of the living, but in the realm of the dead. A nobleman's journey into the afterlife required more than just spiritual belief. It demanded a fully stocked estate. In Han Dynasty China, the tombs of the elite were furnished not with the actual buildings, but with exquisite ceramic replicas known as minki. These were spirit objects, magical provisions for the world to come. A single tomb might contain a miniature universe, a tiny farm complete with watchtowers and pigsties, wells and milling sheds, all centered around one crucial structure, a multi-storied granary with a tiled roof and ventilated walls. This was not a child's playset, it was a deeply held conviction made tangible. The Chinese worldview saw the afterlife as a direct continuation of earthly existence, and to arrive empty-handed was the ultimate failure. The meticulous detail in these ceramic granaries is a direct statement of what mattered most. Grain was not merely a commodity, it was the foundation of civilization, the very measure of a stable and prosperous society, both in this world and the next. The size and grandeur of a model estate directly reflected the social rank of its owner, offering archaeologists a clear window into Han's social hierarchy. While official records might give us dry numbers on tax quotas and harvest yields, these ceramic models show us the living, breathing context of storage. They place the granary right next to the home and the barn, integrating food security into the daily rhythm of life and, by extension, the eternal rhythm of death. They reveal a culture where economic power and spiritual salvation were two sides of the same coin, where ensuring you had enough to eat was a cosmic responsibility. This profound desire to preserve one's essence for eternity, to keep things perfectly intact, finds a remarkable parallel in a much colder climate, where an entire community's survival depended on keeping things perfectly frozen. While the Han were preparing for the afterlife, the Roman Empire was building monuments to feed the living. In the bustling port of Ostia, towering brick facades loomed over the docks, their massive doors open to receive the grain ships from Egypt and North Africa. These were the Horrea, the colossal state warehouses that formed the logistical backbone of an empire. Their design was a masterwork of practical engineering. Inside, the floors were raised on a forest of small brick pillars called suspensory, creating a protective air cushion that fought off ground dampness and thwarted the armies of rats and insects that could devour a city's food supply. Thick walls and few high windows maintained a constant, cool, and dry environment, perfect for preserving vast quantities of wheat, olive oil, and wine. This was not merely storage, it was a calculated defense against spoilage and loss on an almost unimaginable scale. The administration of these warehouses was a serious business, overseen by a dedicated official known as the Procurator Horiorum, who managed a small army of clerks and laborers. Every sack of grain was logged, every amphora of oil accounted for in a system of record-keeping as robust as the buildings themselves. This entire operation existed to serve the Annona, the public grain dole that fed Rome's million-strong population. The emperors understood a fundamental truth: a hungry populace is a restless one. The phrase bread and circuses was not just a cynical observation, it was the operating manual for imperial stability. The sheer volume these warehouses could hold, some capable of storing thousands of tons of grain, reveals the breathtaking reach of Roman trade. It was a network that stretched from the Nile to the Thames, all funneling sustenance into the belly of the beast that was Rome. The Horrea were more than just functional buildings, they were potent symbols of imperial power and economic integration, proving that the empire could not only conquer the world but also keep it fed. This centralized, state-driven model of supply would echo through the centuries, a precedent for every major empire that followed. From these bustling ports, we journey to a silent desert, where an entire civilization chose to hide its greatest wealth inside the mountains themselves. The desert city of Petra was not built on gold, but on the certain knowledge of where the next rain would fall. The Nabateans, those master architects of a waterless world, transformed their rose-red capital not by fighting the arid environment, but by collaborating with it. They carved the very mountains into a giant, intricate catchment system. Across the cliff faces, they chiseled channels to guide every drop of seasonal runoff. They built dams to control flash floods, and most importantly, they hollowed out the sandstone itself to create vast, hidden cisterns. These were not simple pools, but sealed, plaster-lined reservoirs that could hold millions of gallons of water, protecting it from evaporation under the relentless sun. The most famous of these, a massive reservoir carved near the entrance to the narrow canyon known as the Sick, served as a monumental welcome and a powerful statement of control. It announced to every caravan arriving with frankincense and myrrh that this city, seemingly in the middle of nowhere, possessed the one resource that made all trade possible. This sophisticated hydrology was the true source of Nabatean wealth. It allowed them to support a dense urban population, to cultivate gardens, and to offer fresh water to thousands of camels and their merchants, all while charging a premium for the service. The placement of each cistern was a calculated decision, based on a profound understanding of watersheds and rainfall patterns passed down through generations. It was a long-term survival strategy etched in stone, proving that in the right hands, the most basic element of life could be stored and managed to build an empire. This mastery of a liquid resource finds a stark and fascinating contrast in the far north, where another civilization achieved a similar feat of preservation, but by harnessing the power of cold rather than defying the power of heat. Buried deep within an Arctic mountain, the Svalbard Global Seed Vault serves as a frozen fortress for the very building blocks of human civilization. Its chambers hold millions of seed samples from every corner of the globe, a modern-day Noah's Ark for agriculture, designed to withstand any global disaster. Yet this high-tech endeavor is not a new idea. It is the ultimate expression of a practice as old as farming itself. Long before steel doors and sub-zero temperatures, the very first agricultural communities were already acting as living gene banks. They did not store their most vital resource in a single, remote location, but in the collective knowledge of every farmer who carefully selected seeds from the hardiest, most productive plants. This was a decentralized, informal network of preservation where the best seeds were traded between villages, shared at gatherings, and passed down through families. This continuous, deliberate act was a form of biocultural memory, safeguarding not just the physical seeds but the wisdom of how to grow them. It was an oral tradition that ensured genetic diversity and crop resilience against blight, drought, or pestilence. The impulse to save a portion of today's harvest to secure tomorrow's future is one of humanity's oldest stories. It reveals a profound, ancient understanding that our survival is woven directly into the biological wealth we choose to protect. This long view of preservation, thinking in terms of generations and global catastrophe, stands in stark contrast to a storage system designed for a much more personal and immediate journey into the unknown. The temple precinct in ancient Uruk was a city within a city, its storerooms overflowing with the wealth of an entire civilization. These were not just places of prayer, but the bustling economic heart of the world's first urban centers. Within their mud brick walls, you would find towering piles of barley, baskets of sweet dates, and precious vats of sesame oil, all brought by the community as offerings to the gods. But the temple's wealth did not stop with food. It extended to gleaming stacks of copper and silver, bolts of fine linen, and workshops producing everything from pottery to sophisticated metal tools. This was the central bank, the tax collection agency, and the major employer all rolled into one sacred institution. The gods themselves were considered the true landowners, and the high priests acted as their divine accountants and stewards on earth. Every single item that entered or left these storerooms was meticulously recorded. Scribes pressed sharpened reeds into soft clay tablets, creating the world's first written records in a script we call cuneiform. These are not epic poems, but detailed inventory lists and receipts. One tablet might record a delivery of 500 measures of barley from a farmer named Ernanch, while another details the distribution of wool to a weaver or a daily beer ration to a laborer. This explosion of bureaucracy was born directly from the need to manage this concentrated wealth. It reveals a society where your relationship with the divine was also your economic contract. The temple provided for its dependents, from the elite priests to the humblest craftsperson, creating a form of welfare that stabilized the entire city. This system made urban life possible, fueling population growth and allowing for the specialization of labor. You could not have built the great ziggurats or sustained a class of administrators and artists without this sacred engine of accumulation and redistribution. The very act of storing grain was a divine ritual, and the ledger was a holy text. This fusion of faith and finance created a powerful theocracy where control over resources was both a religious duty and the ultimate source of authority. From these sacred storehouses that powered the first cities, we moved to the fortified warehouses that sustained the most formidable warriors of the ancient world. Those towering cyclopean walls were more than just a defense. They were a statement of power, built from colossal, unshaped stones that seemed only giants could have moved them. The citadels of Mycenae and Turin were fortresses designed to protect one thing above all, the king's wealth. Deep within their labyrinthine corridors, behind gates guarded by stone lions, lay the true heart of the palace, the storerooms. Linear B tablets from these sites list the contents in dry administrative detail: bronze ingots by the thousands, stacks of swords and spears, and vast quantities of olive oil and wine stored in giant jars called Pithoi. This was not a diversified economy like the Minoans, but a system focused on the instruments of war and the luxury goods that defined elite status. The very location of these magazines, buried in the most secure core of the citadel, speaks of a society constantly looking over its shoulder, a warrior elite consolidating every valuable resource behind impregnable walls. The sheer volume of olive oil is particularly revealing. Much of it was perfumed, a valuable commodity in trade networks that stretched across the Aegean. This points to a thriving industry where the palace not only stored wealth but actively managed its production and exchange. The entire economy was one of centralized redistribution. The qanats, the king, collected these goods as tribute or from palace-controlled lands. He then redistributed them to his loyal followers, the warriors and officials who formed his power base. A gift of bronze for new weapons or fine oil for a ceremony was not just a payment, it was a reinforcement of a social bond, a constant reminder of where power originated. The citadel was both a fortress and a living treasury, its massive stones safeguarding the very material basis of Mycenaean kingship. This obsessive focus on security, on hiding immense wealth away, leads us to consider a system that worked in the opposite way, a storage method that hid its treasures in plain sight. That same impulse to preserve food for the future took a beautifully decentralized form across North America. From the birch forests of the subarctic to the vast expanse of the Great Plains, many indigenous communities relied on a simple yet brilliant technology, the cache pit. These were not monumental state granaries but personal, practical vaults dug directly into the earth, often in secluded locations known only to a family or a small band. A typical pit was carefully lined with dried grass, animal hides, or sheets of bark, creating a sealed, insulated environment that kept its precious contents safe from scavengers and the harsh elements. Inside, one might find a community's most vital reserves: dense bricks of pemmican made from dried meat and berries, sacks of wild rice, or starchy tubers like the camas root. The survival of a group through a long, bitter winter could depend entirely on the integrity of these hidden larders. This was a form of wealth that left no permanent mark on the landscape, a storage system perfectly adapted to a mobile or semi-sedentary way of life. The knowledge of where to dig, how to line the pit, and what conditions would best preserve the food was not written down in any manual. It was living knowledge passed orally from elder to child, a deep, generational understanding of the local environment and its materials. This practice reflects a fundamentally different philosophy of property. Wealth was not something to be accumulated and displayed in a central fortress, but something to be secured and shared according to need, dispersed across the territory like a secret map of survival. The cache pit embodies a relationship with the land based on use and reciprocity, not ownership and hoarding. It was an elegant, sustainable adaptation that stored not just food, but the very wisdom required to live in rhythm with nature. This philosophy of hidden, practical storage stands in stark contrast to the next system, where storage vessels were designed to be highly visible, carrying profound symbolic weight for all to see. While the state Horrea fed a metropolis, the rhythm of the ancient Mediterranean was truly set by the humble dolium. These massive pottery jars, some standing as tall as a person and wider than a man's outstretched arms, were the fixed, unglamorous workhorses of the Roman world and the Greek civilizations before them. In the courtyard of a rural villa or the basement of a city apartment block, you would find ranks of these thick-walled giants, often partially buried in the earth. This was not for concealment but for brilliant climate control. The soil's constant, cool temperature provided the perfect environment for the slow, steady fermentation of wine or the stable preservation of olive oil and grain. These were not single-use items. A crack or a chip was not a death sentence. Specialized craftsmen, the dolorum reparators, would travel from estate to estate, drilling holes and clamping broken sections with lead staples, giving these valuable containers a second life. Their very repair speaks to a culture of thrift and long-term investment at the most fundamental level of the economy. This was storage for self-sufficiency and for local trade. The contents of a single dolium could represent a family's entire annual surplus, the capital that would see them through a lean year or be sold at market for profit. But the story of the dolium did not end at the farm gate. The famous Madrague de Jean's shipwreck off the coast of France reveals their other crucial role. The sunken vessel's hull was found packed with these giant jars, acting as the primary shipping containers for a cargo of wine. They were the ancient equivalent of the modern shipping container, sturdy, standardized, and designed to withstand a long, perilous sea journey. The dolium embodies a patient, cyclical view of time, tied to the seasons of planting and harvest, and the slow, alchemical process of fermentation. It represents a small-scale capitalism rooted in the land, a world away from the impersonal scale of the state Annona. From these earthenware giants that stored the fruit of the Mediterranean sun, we ascend to a system that mastered the cold, where preservation was a matter of communal survival etched into the frozen ground. High in the Andes, administrators did not carry clay tablets or parchment scrolls, but bundles of intricately knotted cords. The quipu was a language spun from string, a complex device that stored the empire's memory without a single written word. Each quipu consisted of a main cord from which dozens of pendant cords hung, like a fringe of possibilities. The information was not inked onto a flat surface, but encoded into a three-dimensional tapestry of knots. The type of knot represented a number, its position on the cord indicated its place value, and the color of the string, derived from natural dyes, could signify the subject matter, whether it was a count of llamas, a record of households, or an account of stored grain. A single quipu could thus catalogue the entire wealth of a province, transforming wool and cotton into a durable, portable database. For a state that spanned thousands of miles of rugged terrain, this was a revolutionary technology. A runner could carry a quipu across the empire's road network, delivering a detailed report that was immune to rain and required no translation between spoken languages. It was the ultimate administrative tool for a multi-ethnic empire, a tactile, universal code for managing resources and labor obligations. Yet the true mystery of the quipu runs deeper than mere accounting. Some researchers, like Gary Urton, propose that beyond recording statistical data, certain quipus may have encoded narrative histories, songs, and genealogies. This suggests they were not just spreadsheets, but potential libraries, storing the very stories and identities of the people they counted. The quipu fundamentally challenges our narrow, Western definition of an archive. It proves that a repository of knowledge does not need to be a room full of scrolls, but can be a bundle of cords, a system where information is felt as much as it is read. It represents a unique intellectual pathway, a different way of thinking about how to preserve the past. This concept of safeguarding a community's most vital assets finds a powerful and ancient expression not in knotted strings, but deep within the shared earth. Beneath the floor of an Iron Age roundhouse, a secret world awaited. A single stone, indistinguishable from the others, could be lifted to reveal a steep, narrow passage descending into darkness. This was a souterrain, an underground labyrinth of stone-lined tunnels and chambers hidden from view. While their exact purpose is still debated by archaeologists, their design points to two crucial functions: storage and refuge. These were not grand state projects, but the desperate ingenuity of small farming communities in Britain and Ireland. The cool, stable temperature deep within the earth created a perfect natural cellar, ideal for preserving grain through the damp seasons and for keeping dairy products like cheese and butter from spoiling. But the need for such secrecy hints at a darker reality. This was a volatile world of cattle raids and territorial disputes, where a season's harvest could be plundered in a single night. The souterrain was a direct response to that threat, a place to safeguard a community's most vital assets from human predators. Constructing one of these hidden complexes was no small feat. It required the coordinated labor of an entire kin group or small village, quarrying stone, digging deep into the earth, and roofing the chambers with massive stone slabs. This collective effort was an investment in shared survival, reinforcing the social bonds that held the community together. The very existence of the souterrain speaks to a defensive mindset where prosperity was not something to be displayed, but something to be concealed. Your wealth was measured not in what you could show off, but in what you could successfully hide. This philosophy of securing physical resources against immediate threats stands in stark contrast to a system designed to store something far more abstract, yet infinitely more powerful: the authority of a king. Deep within the ceremonial heart of La Venta, the earth itself was transformed into a sacred vault. Olmec rulers did not build granaries or warehouses, but instead commissioned the digging of immense pits, some over 70 feet deep, to be filled with offerings of staggering wealth and then sealed forever. These were not caches meant for retrieval, but permanent deposits for the gods. The contents were meticulously arranged, a symphony in stone. Dozens, sometimes hundreds of polished celts, their surfaces gleaming like dark mirrors, were laid out in symbolic patterns. Exquisite jade figurines representing jaguars and supernatural beings were placed with deliberate care. The materials themselves spoke of immense power. The basalt was quarried from mountains dozens of miles away, its transport a logistical nightmare requiring immense communal labor, while the jade was sourced from even more distant lands, a testament to far-flung trade networks. This was wealth in the form of exquisite objects, and the human effort they represented being systematically taken out of circulation. The act of burial was the entire point. By layering these precious items in different colored sands and clays, the Olmec elite were performing a profound alchemy. They were converting hard material wealth into intangible spiritual capital. This ritual storage proved their unique ability to communicate with the supernatural realm, a power that legitimized their rule and, they believed, maintained the very balance of the cosmos. It was an investment not in earthly stability, but in cosmic order, ensuring the sun would rise and the rains would fall. The sealed pit was a contract with the gods, written not on clay, but in jade and basalt, a permanent sacrifice to secure a fertile and ordered world. This profound dedication of resources to an unseen realm finds a powerful counterpoint in a storage system built for the most worldly of purposes: the expansion of an empire. A king's thirst could command an empire. In the heart of the formidable Assyrian palaces, far from the depicted scenes of lion hunts and military conquests carved on their walls, lay a different kind of treasury: the royal wine cellars. These were not dark, dusty basements, but meticulously organized complexes, their shelves lined with large, distinctive jars, each one often stamped with an official administrative seal. This was a system of luxury under lock and key. Inscriptions from kings like Sennacherib do not merely mention wine, they boast of it. He detailed the planting of vast vineyards across the empire and the construction of elaborate irrigation channels and aqueducts with one primary purpose: to keep his cellars perpetually stocked. This was a beverage, yes, but its journey from a distant vine to the royal cup was a direct manifestation of imperial power. The ability to command such a delicate, perishable resource from the farthest provinces and store it in such vast quantities demonstrated a logistical reach that went far beyond mere military might. A toast with Assyrian wine was never just a drink. It was a calculated display aimed at impressing courtiers and intimidating foreign ambassadors, a sensory proof of the kingdom's wealth, sophistication, and absolute control. The cellars themselves were managed by a dedicated staff of officials, their records forming a crucial part of the palace's economic spine. Controlling access to this luxury was as important as controlling the army's bronze supply. It reinforced social hierarchies, rewarding loyalty and service with a taste of the royal bounty. In this empire, storage was theater, and every sealed jar was a prop in the performance of absolute power. This imperial obsession with provisioning for lavish ceremony finds a stunning parallel in a storage system designed not for a king's court, but for a soul's final voyage. For a Viking chieftain, the ship was more than just a vessel. It was his entire world in microcosm. In death, this world was sealed for a final voyage. The Oseberg ship burial in Norway stands as a breathtaking testament to this belief. Unearthed from a massive clay mound, the ship itself was a masterpiece of maritime engineering, but its true purpose was revealed in the cargo it carried into the earth. The deck was not empty. It was a carefully packed repository for an eternal journey, laden with wooden sledges and a richly decorated cart, 4 beds, and all the tools for weaving and cooking. There were barrels of food and drink, alongside the grim remains of sacrificed animals, including 2 oxen and 10 horses, all arranged with deliberate purpose. This was not a random collection of grave goods, but a complete and functioning estate, a snapshot of a chieftain's life and authority preserved under tons of earth. The ship, the very symbol of the mobility and raiding power that defined his status, was transformed into a stationary, sacred container. It stored his social identity, ensuring he would arrive in the next realm not as a pauper, but as a person of consequence, equipped with the means to maintain his station for eternity. The sheer quality and diversity of the objects, from ornately carved wooden posts to simple kitchen utensils, provide an unparalleled window into Viking material culture. They reveal a society whose cosmology was deeply practical, where the afterlife was seen as a direct continuation of earthly existence, demanding the same provisions and symbols of power. This was storage on a cosmic scale, a final, monumental act of provisioning for a leader's voyage to another world. From these sea-going tombs that stored a soul's identity, we return to the land and discover a storage system that sustained an entire continent's ecology. The land itself was their larder, and fire was their tool of cultivation. For over 60,000 years, Aboriginal Australians perfected a form of storage so integrated with the environment that it challenges our very definition of the word. This was not about building granaries or digging pits, but about actively shaping the ecosystem to ensure its future abundance. The practice is known as cultural burning, a sophisticated and deliberate use of low-intensity fire. These were not the catastrophic wildfires we see today, but cool, controlled burns carefully timed with the seasons. The purpose was multifaceted. Fire cleared away dry undergrowth, reducing the fuel for massive, uncontrollable blazes. It recycled nutrients back into the soil, promoting the growth of specific, valuable food plants. Fresh, tender shoots would emerge from the blackened earth, attracting kangaroos and other game, making them easier to hunt. In this system, the future food supply was not locked away in a container, but stored directly within the health and productivity of the living landscape. The true archive, however, was not the land alone. It was the knowledge of how to care for it. This immense body of deep ecological wisdom was itself a stored cultural database, passed down through countless generations, not in written manuals, but through songlines and oral tradition. A songline is a navigational route across the country, but it is also a living map that encodes the locations of water sources, the flowering cycles of plants, and the precise protocols for when and where to burn. To know the song was to know how to read the land and manage its resources. This represents a dynamic, interactive form of storage where the container is the entire living environment. It is a reciprocal relationship with nature, a covenant of care that ensured sustainability for millennia. This philosophy stands in stark contrast to the Western idea of storage as a passive act of taking things out of circulation and hoarding them away. Here, storage was an active process of giving back, of investing in the land's future productivity. It reveals a profound understanding that the greatest resource to preserve is not the harvest itself, but the system that produces the harvest generation after generation. This deep connection to a living, managed ecosystem finds a fascinating parallel along the coastlines, where another ancient culture learned to store the bounty of the sea in the most unexpected way. A master carpenter did not assemble these boxes with nails or glue. Along the lush Pacific Northwest coast, a single plank of red cedar was carefully scored and steamed until it became pliable as cloth. It was then bent at 3 corners and secured with pegs or lashing to form a perfect, seamless container. The result was a Bentwood box, a marvel of engineering and artistry that served as the vault, the wardrobe, and the archive for its owners. These were not hidden away. They stood prominently in the longhouse, their surfaces alive with the forms of ravens, bears, and killer whales, each crest and line declaring a family's unbroken connection to the mythic past. A box might hold the transformative power of a shaman's regalia, the dense nutritional wealth of dried salmon and berries, or the liquid capital of Yakhchal oil, a precious trade commodity often called grease. But the box itself was often more valuable than its contents. The artistry embedded in its construction was a form of stored labor and inherited knowledge, a testament to the skill of the maker. During a potlatch, the great ceremonial feast where status was not inherited but earned through generosity, a chief might distribute these very boxes as gifts. In that act, the box transformed from a container of objects into a vessel of social power. It stored legal precedent, proving a leader's right to certain fishing grounds or berry patches through the stories depicted on its sides. To possess such a box was to hold a deed to your heritage, a physical claim to your place in the world. This was storage as a living contract, where the container was inseparable from the identity it protected. The next system, however, moved beyond wood and into the realm of stone, carving its records not onto objects but directly into the bones of the earth. The soft volcanic rock of Cappadocia concealed entire worlds. Beneath the surface of what is now Turkey, engineers and laborers carved out labyrinths descending as deep as 18 levels into the earth. These were not mere shelters but fully equipped subterranean cities, with spaces for thousands of residents, their livestock, and all the supplies needed to wait out a siege. A single city like Derinkuyu contained everything from living quarters and chapels to wine and oil presses, storerooms bursting with grain, and even cemeteries. This was a civilization turned inward, a community that chose to hide its entire existence rather than risk annihilation. Their design was a masterpiece of defensive engineering. Long, narrow passages forced invaders to proceed single file, while massive, wheel-shaped stone doors weighing hundreds of pounds could be rolled into place to seal off entire sections. Intricate ventilation shafts, some stretching over 100 feet to the surface, provided fresh air to the deepest chambers, while hidden wells tapped into underground water sources. Every detail was calculated for long-term survival. The very layout of these cities reveals a society built on mutual dependence and a shared priority: the preservation of their people, their culture, and their faith against any external threat. This was the ultimate act of defensive storage. They were not just saving food or wine, they were saving themselves, burying their entire way of life in stone to ensure it could one day re-emerge. This profound need to safeguard a community's spiritual core finds its expression in a different kind of repository, one that stored not people, but the very power of their beliefs. Stone vaults echoed not with prayer, but with the quiet drip of ale and the rich scent of aging cheese. Across medieval Europe, the monastery was far more than a house of worship. It was a sprawling, self-sufficient economic empire. Its power extended across the countryside through a network of outlying farms called granges, and its heart beat deep within the cool, dimly lit cellars beneath the cloisters. Here, the monastery stored the immense wealth of its landholdings, the tithes from tenant farmers, and the products of its own highly specialized labor. Monks were master brewers, vintners, and cheesemakers, and their cellars were filled with barrels of wine from their own vineyards, vats of beer from their breweries, and wheels of cheese from their dairies. This was not mere hoarding, it was a sacred obligation. The rule of Saint Benedict explicitly called for self-sufficiency and care for the poor, transforming efficient storage from a practical task into a profound religious duty. The architecture of these spaces was a testament to this piety. Their soaring vaulted ceilings and thick stone walls maintained a constant, cool temperature year-round, a perfect environment for the long, slow aging of wine and the stable preservation of vast quantities of food. This carefully managed abundance supported not only the monastic community itself, but also fueled their extensive charitable works, feeding the hungry and offering hospitality to travelers. Every barrel stored, every sack of grain accounted for, was a brick in this fortress of faith. The monastery's entire economy was a spiritual one, where managing resources wisely was seen as a direct form of devotion, a way of stewarding God's gifts for the benefit of all. This sacred system of preservation, focused on sustaining both body and soul, stands in stark contrast to a revolutionary system designed to preserve the most fragile commodity of all, human knowledge. The king's scribes did not simply record battles, they captured entire worlds in clay. In the 7th century before the Common Era, Assyrian King Ashurbanipal assembled a storage system of a different order entirely, the Great Library of Nineveh. This was not a warehouse for grain or weapons, but a fortress for knowledge itself, a collection of over 30,000 cuneiform tablets gathered from every corner of the Mesopotamian world. Its purpose was far from passive. This library was a deliberate instrument of imperial control, an attempt to centralize and command the entire intellectual heritage of the civilizations Assyria had conquered. By bringing the myths, scientific knowledge, and administrative records of Sumer, Akkad, and Babylon under one royal roof, Ashurbanipal was making a profound statement. He was not just storing information, he was owning it. The organization within the library reveals a sophisticated mind. Tablets were meticulously sorted by subject and stored in different rooms, each dedicated to a specific branch of learning. One chamber might hold the entire Epic of Gilgamesh, while another contained detailed medical diagnoses and prescriptions, and still another was filled with astronomical omens used to guide the king's decisions. This was a search engine carved in clay, a system designed for retrieval and use. Royal correspondence sat alongside treaties and tax records, making the library the ultimate administrative tool for governing a vast and diverse empire. Its discovery in the 19th century by archaeologists like Austin Henry Layard was a watershed moment, unearthing the very texts that would found the modern study of Assyriology. The fire that ultimately consumed Nineveh ironically baked and preserved these clay tablets for millennia, a final, cruel twist that saved the knowledge the king had sought to control. This library represents the ultimate evolution of storage, a system that bridges the tangible world of objects with the invisible world of ideas. It proves that the most powerful thing a civilization can store is not its wealth, but its memory. And that brings us to the end of our journey through these 23 ancient systems. From the first grain pits to this vast library, a common thread emerges. Each system in its own way is a story about time. They are all attempts to defy the present, to reach into the future and ensure that something, whether it is a harvest, a king's authority, or an entire culture's knowledge, will survive the relentless passage of days. They show us that storage is not a mundane act, but a fundamental expression of hope, power, and the human desire to leave a mark on the world that will long outlast us. These silent structures and forgotten practices speak a hidden language, one that tells a deeper story than any written chronicle. They were never passive containers, but active forces that shaped the destiny of civilizations. The choice of what to store and how to store it was a direct reflection of a society's deepest priorities. It reveals what they valued enough to shield from decay, from thieves, and from the relentless erosion of time itself. When you look at a decentralized cache pit, you see a community's quiet resilience, its strategy for survival embedded in the land. When you stand before the ruins of a Roman Horrea, you hear the booming voice of imperial control, a system designed to command and integrate a vast empire. The Inca Quipu and the Library of Ashurbanipal teach us a crucial lesson, that information itself is perhaps the most vital resource of all, requiring its own sophisticated methods of preservation. This language of storage whispers to us about ancient climates and the conflicts that forced people underground. It outlines social hierarchies, showing us who controlled the surplus and who did not. It gives us a window into spiritual beliefs, revealing what people felt they needed to take with them into the afterlife or offer to the gods. These systems are the material footprint of human ingenuity, a physical record of our endless struggle to impose order on a chaotic world, to secure our place within it, and to send a message into the future. To understand this language is to read history not through the words our ancestors left behind, but through their actions, through the tangible choices they made to ensure that something of their world would endure. Our journey through these 23 ancient systems reveals a profound truth. The simple act of storing something away is a civilization's autobiography, written not in ink but in stone, clay, and earth. These structures were never passive containers. They were active forces that shaped economies, solidified political power, and gave form to spiritual beliefs. We have walked from the first grain pits that sparked social inequality to the ship burials that launched chieftains into the afterlife. We have seen how a quipu's knots could hold an empire's memory, and how a monastery's cellar blended faith with practical economics. Each system, from the hidden souterrain to the monumental library, tells a unique story of human adaptation, foresight, and the relentless desire to impose order on a chaotic world. They offer us insights that often surpass what we can learn from written records alone, because they show us what people did, not just what they said. So the next time you look at a modern warehouse, a sprawling data center, or even your own well-stocked pantry, Consider what these spaces would say about us to someone 1,000 years from now. What do our choices to store endless data, vast quantities of goods, and even genetic code reveal about our own values, our fears, and our vision for the future? If you found this journey into the hidden language of storage as fascinating as I did, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the untold stories of our past. Thank you for watching.